No one wanted the love of a guardian wall. They'd painted it as a soulless beast, a hunched shadow among the ruins of a bombed-out neighborhood. "Don't go near him," the children would say, as their mothers dragged them by the arm as they passed. But she didn't listen. One gray afternoon, with the wind stirring the earth like the whispers of old ghosts, a thin figure stood before him. The wall didn't move. It didn't speak, but its eyes were alive. The cracked concrete crunched beneath her feet. It smelled of rust, of neglect, of history buried beneath fear. She said nothing. She just looked at him, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. That's when it happened. A tear ran down the wall's cheek. It wasn't water. It was time. It was everything I'd kept quiet. The city had been ravaged by war years before, but its scars remained raw. The streets were a mixture of dust and broken memories. Charred walls, glass buried in the earth like forgotten blades. The sun didn't shine as it had before. Now it burned with rage, as if it too was tired of seeing so much pain. At the center of that oblivion were the remains of an old checkpoint. There, the guardian wall had remained. No one knew his real name. Some said he had been a soldier. Others, a traitor punished by his own side. But they all agreed on one thing. Since the end of the conflict, he hadn't moved. He remained there, standing, like a human statue, covered in a threadbare cloak and a helmet deformed by the explosion that had marked him forever. His face was half hidden by a cloth, but what was barely visible spoke of ashes, of fire, of something that had died, but not completely. Around him, life tried to go on. Women carrying water in rusty buckets, barefoot children chasing shadows. The smell of old smoke still hung in the air, and although everyone avoided it, no one could ignore its presence. It was like a monument to shame, a reminder of something no one wanted to name again. But then she arrived, a young activist, with a serene face but a firm gaze. She came from outside, from an organization that sought to restore memory, not erase it. She walked among the ruins with respect, like someone treading on sacred ground. She asked names, listened to stories, collected torn photographs, and when she heard about the wall, she didn't feel fear. She felt a question. Why was she still there? What was she waiting for? While everyone watched her suspiciously, she approached the edge of the forbidden, where no one dared to cross. And that's when everything began to change. Her name was Leah. She wasn't tall or strong, but she had a presence that shattered silences. Her gait was calm, like someone who has learned not to rush through pain. She wore simple clothes, a beige linen blouse, a long skirt with frayed edges, and she always carried a notebook in her hand, where she jotted down whatever the wind whispered to her. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and her eyes didn't look for culprits. They looked for truths. Leah wasn't naive. She had walked through destroyed villages, heard cries hidden in lullabies, but there was something about that human wall that challenged her. A different silence. A silence that wasn't rejection, but waiting. The wall, for its part, had no name. At least not one anyone remembered. Children called him the Steadfast. Adults whispered it like a curse. The one who betrayed and survived. No one knew exactly what he had done. Some said he let his comrades die. Others, that he saved an enemy. His face, partially burned, showed a wound that seemed never to have healed. He always wore the same gray cloak, its edges blackened, and leaned lightly on a rusty spear he used as a walking stick. He didn't speak, but he breathed. And every breath was a battle he resolved not to abandon. One afternoon, as Leah sat writing on a rock near him, she dropped her notebook. The wind carried it to her feet. She didn't move. She waited. And then, slowly, the wall bent down. He picked up the notebook. His fingers, hard and marked, clumsily brushed the paper. He handed it back to her without a word, but his eyes looked at her for the first time, not as a threat, not as a victim, but as someone who, perhaps, could still hear. From that gesture on, their encounters became routine. Leah spoke. He listened. Sometimes he lowered his head. Sometimes he clenched his fists. But he never left. He never pushed her away. And so, slowly, the two began to talk to each other. One with words, the other with silences. The days began to repeat themselves with a disturbing cadence. Leah would arrive at dawn, sit near the wall, open her notebook, and begin to talk. She didn't care whether he responded or not. She talked about everything. The town she had visited the week before, the woman still searching for her son in the rubble, the boy who had found a rusty medal and believed it was magical. And little by little, she talked about herself too, about her missing father, her mother who never got over the war, her fear of forgetting what she had never experienced. The wall didn't say a word, but every time she arrived, he was already awake, and when she left, it took him a little longer to close his eyes again. The routine was what set off the alarm bells. First, there were the murmurs from the village. She shouldn't be so close. That man is dangerous. What if he's faking it? The elders began to secretly watch her. The children were no longer approaching. Leah noticed, but she didn't stop. Then a group of armed men arrived. They weren't official soldiers, but they wore patched uniforms and had eyes accustomed to command. One of them approached Leah as she was writing. "What are you doing here, alone with him?" she asked, pointing at the wall as if it were a wild animal. "I'm listening," she replied, without raising her voice. The man laughed. "He has nothing to say. He's just waiting for an opportunity." That same day, someone threw a stone from afar. It hit the wall's leg, which didn't even flinch. Leah did. She stood up, looked him straight in the eyes, and for the first time, asked, "Why don't you defend yourself?" He looked down, and in a barely audible murmur he replied, "Because if I do, I confirm what they say." From that moment on, something changed. The wall was no longer just a spectator of their encounters. He began to speak in short, painful sentences, as if each word cost him years. He confessed that during the war he disobeyed an order, that he refused to execute a group of refugee children, that his comrades beat him, accused him of treason, and abandoned him in the crossfire, that he survived but never picked up a weapon again. From then on, that's what I became, a wall, not out of punishment, by choice. Leah wrote down every word, but more than writing, she felt. And the more she understood, the more dangerous she became to those who wanted to bury the past. One morning, they found his notebook open, its pages scattered on the floor. His backpack had been ripped open, and on the wall behind the wall, someone wrote in charcoal, "He's not human, neither will you be." The armed men returned. They said they were there to ensure security. One of them, the same one who had questioned her earlier, grabbed her arm tightly. "I'm warning you, if you keep coming, we won't be able to protect you." She didn't respond. She just stared at the wall. And in that instant, he saw something new. Her eyes weren't just sad. They were full of fear. Not for him, for her. The tension became unbearable. The townspeople began to close their doors as she passed by. Some accused her of being a traitor, of reviving what should die. But Leah was no longer seeking approval. She was seeking the truth, and she had found it. One night, in the rain, Leah approached once more. The wall was there, trembling slightly from the cold, soaked, but motionless. She knelt before it, took out an old photograph and placed it in its hands. It was a worn image, almost erased by time. Two children, a girl with braids, a boy with a serious expression. She looked into his eyes and asked, "Was that you?" The wall didn't respond, but a tear fell on the photo, and Leah understood that what lay behind that silence was much more human than the people dared to accept. That morning, the town awoke to a roar. It wasn't thunder or an explosion. It was human fury, unleashed like a storm. The house where Leah slept was surrounded by shadows armed with torches, angry voices, and eyes filled with ill-disguised fear. "We want him gone! She and him!" they shouted. They pounded on the walls, shook the doors, as if the echo could erase the ghosts Leah had brought out of the silence. From within, she trembled, not for herself, but for what she knew they would do if they felt unpunished. She took her notebook, put it in her backpack, and without a word, walked out the front door. The crowd parted like a river on the brink of violence. She didn't lower her gaze. She walked with firm steps to the square, where the wall still stood, as always, as if the world couldn't shake it any more than it had already experienced. But that day, it was different. They had drawn a circle around it, like a symbolic cage. Some men carried stones, others chains, and one, the same one who had threatened her earlier, held a torch. "This is your last warning, Leah," she said, her voice cracking with rage. "He doesn't deserve your compassion. He's a threat to everyone." Leah stepped forward and placed herself between the wall and the crowd. The rain was falling again, as if the sky were trying to cool the hatred. "What are you so afraid of?" she asked. "That I remember? That I talk?" No one answered, but the stones began to rise. Then, the wall moved. For the first time in years, he took a step forward. He stood next to Leah. His large body trembled not from cowardice, but from the weight of the moment. "That's enough," he said. His voice was raspy, as if coming from a rusty place. The silence was absolute. "Yes, I disobeyed. I didn't kill those children. I chose not to shoot. Does that make me a monster? Maybe, but I'd rather be that than be one of you." The man with the torch moved forward. "Liar! You betrayed them." "Who did I betray?" the wall screamed. "A soulless war? Orders that killed innocent people? I was there. I saw them. I saw them burn schools. They buried children's bodies like garbage." The tears now mingled with the rain. Leah remained at his side, motionless. "And you?" the wall asked, looking at the group's leader. "Where were you when they were silent? How many memories did you bury so you could sleep?" There was a moment when everything seemed to stop. A whisper cut through the crowd. No one threw the stone. No one lit the fuse. Because finally, someone had spoken, and their words weren't weapons. They were mirrors. Leah then took the notebook, raised it to the sky and said, "This is his testimony, not that of a hero, not that of a villain, but that of someone who chose to feel when everyone was asking him to kill." And as if something invisible had broken, the crowd began to disperse. One by one, they lowered their gaze. Some dropped their stones. Others just walked away, silent, overcome not by force but by a truth they could no longer deny. The wall sank to its knees. Leah knelt beside him. She said nothing. There was no need to. Because in that instant, finally, he was no longer a wall. He was a man. After that night, the silence in the town was never the same. It was no longer a silence imposed by fear, but one that breathed memory. At dawn, the streets were damp and calm. The plaza, avoided for years, was now a place where steps didn't tremble. There was no applause. There was no celebration. But there was something more valuable. Respect. The wall, the man, didn't return to his corner. He sat next to Leah on a stone bench, across from the old checkpoint. Some still looked at him with suspicion, but no longer with hatred. Others began to leave dried flowers on the ground, as a way of asking for forgiveness without words. Leah didn't write anything else in her notebook for several days. She simply watched. Sometimes the man shared fragments that still hurt. Other times they just sat in silence, sharing the burden of what couldn't be said. One day, she asked him his name. He smiled for the first time. "They took it from me when they left me here. But if you call me brother, that's fine." She wrote that down. Brother. Before leaving, because she knew she had to continue on her way, Leah organized a small gathering in the plaza. She invited everyone. Some came out of curiosity, others out of courtesy, and others simply because something inside them had already changed. In front of a white cloth hung between two poles, he projected images he had collected. Smiling children among ruins, elderly people still weaving as a form of resistance, anonymous faces that survived carrying silence in their eyes. Finally, he showed the photo the man now held close to his chest, that of the two children. And then he spoke. "I'm not here to blame, nor to reopen wounds. I'm here because if we bury everything without looking, we'll repeat what we fear most. This man, the one you called a wall, chose not to obey the darkness, and for that, he was punished. But today, he chose to speak, and with that, he freed us all a little. There were tears, but also a first round of applause, and then another, small, timid, but real. That same night, Leah set off with her backpack on her shoulder. As she left the village, she looked back one last time. The man was standing under the lit lantern. He raised a hand. She did the same. Nothing else was needed. Days later, rumors began to spread that another town had welcomed her with violence, that someone had followed her, that her notebook had been confiscated. Some said she had disappeared. Others said she had found refuge in a remote village where she taught children to write their stories. But what no one could deny was what he left behind. The wall was renamed the Sentinel by the children. It was no longer a threat. It was a symbol that even those broken by war could feel again. And their story began to be told in low voices, around campfires, in whispers, like all stories that truly matter. And you? Would you remain silent if your words could save someone? Would you dare to see humanity in someone who everyone called a monster? Comment if you also believe that even the highest walls can learn to love.